Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Mining Stock Education. I'm Bill Powers. If you'd like to engage the show, you can always reach me at bill@miningstockeducation.com. Last week, I hosted with my partner, Kerry Lutz of the Financial Survival Network, a live investor summit that featured Jamie Keach, analyst and lead investor, mining financier with Resource Insider, and president and CEO Ken Berry of Northern Vertex Mining, America's newest gold producer. If you were unable to attend that event, I'm going to put a link in the show notes below, and you can access the recording of that event through the link in the show notes below. And I do want to read to you before I bring on today's guest, that's Brian Lenny of Junior Stock Review. I'd like to read to you a paragraph here, a section of an email I got from a well-respected PhD who's also a shareholder of Northern Vertex who watched the presentation. He writes, "Good intro by Jamie Keach and good presentation by Ken Berry. I agree with Kerry Lutz's comment that it's rare to have management present the good, bad, and the ugly about a project. Ken comes across much differently from the typical VSE type promoter. He comes across as honest and a person who is going to steer the company through all the startup challenges into a long-term profitable company. I look forward to the news releases about the westward expansion on trend as well as on other BLM land. I'll continue to accumulate on the pullbacks. Thank you." So I just read that to you to let you know if you haven't been on these live webcasts before, make sure when you get the invitation, if you're not on a list, sign up for a list. We'll give you the invitations. And if you get the invitations, do make an effort to attend one of them because half of the presentation is actually engaging the management through live Q&A, question and answer. And that's something that you'll be able to do through this venue. And it's something you do if you go to conferences. Well, next week is the Sprott Conference, and so I reached out to my friend Brian Lenny of Junior Stock Review. I asked him to come on the show today to share with us how he engages management live in person at these conferences and what specific things that you can get as an investor that you wouldn't be able to get from a phone call to management over the phone, if you call up the company, or through their presentation on their website. With that being said, Brian, welcome back to the show. And what are some of the key things that you really seek to ascertain when you're engaging management at these shows?
That's a great question. I think first and foremost, the thing you get by going to the conference is that in-person feel for who these people are. You're giving them your money when you make an investment. So knowing who they are, I think, is really important. And so when you go through your questions, you kind of form an opinion of where the company is headed. And then you start to dig down on, who these people exactly are. It can be pretty formal at the booth. But one of the interesting things, and the upcoming Sprott conference is a good example, there's typically cocktail hours. And I think these are great opportunities to kind of be informal with the management teams and kind of, learn who they are and, what makes them tick. And, some of the guys, they never drop their, guard, so to speak. But a lot of people, you get to know them better. And I think that plays huge into, understanding what the capability of that person is.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm recalling back when I was a young man in college and my grandmother advised me, she said, "Bill, when you're looking for a potential spouse, don't just observe that person in context with their friend, but observe that person in context with you alone, in context with their own family unit that they came from, and in context with your family, because you really want to see how someone interacts in a variety of settings." With that being said, when you're engaging these management, and like you said, whether it's the cocktail hour when people's guards maybe are a little down, what other things do you look for in observation of how the management team handles themselves at these conferences?
Well, one of the things that I find useful after I've kind of gone through my set of questions that I do, I still like to hang around the booth and listen to the management team deal with other people. And actually, like the Sprott conference again last year was a great example of how this kind of paid dividends. I'm listening to hear if the story is staying consistent, how the company answers the questions. Some of them are, I guess some people say there's no bad questions. I think there are, but it's interesting to see how the company deals with those kind of questions, or maybe something that's more controversial. I take a lot from just observing, and it's, seeing what other investors are asking. And, I definitely forget stuff. When you're in the the midst of a conversation, it's easy to forget something that's important. So hanging around and listening to what other investors have to ask, I think, can pay huge dividends into your investment choices.
Yeah, who do you like to speak to whether it's the investor relations, corporate development person, or the CEO, or the VP of exploration, or a project geologist? It's very interesting. I can recall PDAC going booth to booth. That's my favorite thing to do, is just to spend 2 days and just go visit all the booths, talking to a geologist who was very passionate and knowledgeable about a certain project, but he had no idea about the capital structure. I asked him how many shares were outstanding and what was the market cap, and he didn't even know that answer. So obviously, within a management team, there's different people that you can get different information from, but generally speaking, who would be the one person that you'd want to engage at a booth?
For me, it's the CEO. And in terms of my, especially first interactions with companies, I want to you talk to the boss first and see what his vision is. And then if the criteria, whether it's capital structure, if all those things are in place, and I want to, dive deeper into the geology of the project, then that's those specialists come in handy. Because you're right, typically there is some, people are so focused on their one aspect of the company that they can't really step out of it. And I don't blame them for that. But yeah, the CEO is my first person that I want to talk to, and then if that goes well, then talking to the geos, or if depending on what stage they're at, a mining engineer. Are definitely people that I want to talk to further.
Both of us will be at the Sprott conference next week. And at that conference, there's, I think, 60 or so presenting companies or exhibitors. And as Rick Rule often points out, these are companies that Sprott invests in. So he considers them more than just sponsors, but they're actually presenters. In that there's been a vetting process, and that Sprott has vetted these companies before they offered them the invitation to participate. That is remarkably different than, let's say, the PDAC, where you're going to have like 500 exhibitors, 10 times the amount of exhibitors. What do you like about Sprott compared to PDAC, or is there any benefit for you, spending the 2 days, as I mentioned, going through, talking, or at least looking at 500 plus companies?
Yeah, it's totally different feel. It's probably much more intimate, meaning that your ability to talk to the companies, because there's a fraction of what they are at PDAC, is much better. And they've got those cocktail hours where you can get much more informal with people. The other side to it, it is an interesting group of people that attend Sprott. And I think this is, typically with the people that I've met, with the size of their portfolio, these people have really interesting backgrounds and views on the sector. And I personally really enjoy it, particularly about the Sprott conference, meeting these people. And I'm talking about fellow investors here. The other side to it is they are, by and large, a very good group of companies. And if you were going to start looking for someone new to start looking in the market, a conference like Sprott, where many of these companies have been vetted, it's a great place to start.
Sometimes when we're seeing people and engaging them at the booths, we may be turned on or turned off by what we see and experience. I can think back a couple years to PDAC when I was engaging a company, an early stage exploration company, and for right or for wrong, the three men that were manning the booth were all, I would say, probably in their mid-70s. And that was a turnoff to me, just by the sake I'm asking myself, what is the long-term plan here if the management, albeit experienced, and they could be the most honest guys in the world, I'm wondering about the future of this company and their ability to succeed because of their age, and the management team collectively was so old. That was a turnoff to me. Have you ever experienced something like that? Or what would be another example of something that you would pick up in person that would be, an immediate turnoff?
Well, but I'll answer it like this. I think it depends what you want. If you are very focused and you know exactly what it is you're looking for in terms of your investment, then I think it's much easier to be kind of turned off by certain things. For me personally, my goal is to make money, and whether that's a short-term investment, long-term investment, or a short on a company, because that's the other thing. even though you talk to a company, you don't like what they have to say. Maybe there's another way you can make money from that. Maybe it's shorting the company instead of, investing for the long term, or on the positive side of things. So I think depending on your perspective, you can glean a number of different information and apply it to a profitable trade. For me personally, I try to be as agnostic as possible and listen to whoever wants to talk. And or at least over the last couple of years, that has really done me well to not to be too discriminating when I look at a booth and look at the marketing material and it's subpar. I've seen some great companies that do not know how to market their company, and vice versa. I've seen companies that have amazing marketing, and then there's not really much substance to them. So I think if you keep an open mind, or if you're very focused, that can help you either delineate who you talk to, or you can stay more broad, and you never know what kind of opportunity you can find.
We'll be right back after this word from our sponsor. Orin Resources is a junior exploration company with the appetite of a major, focused on finding the next globally significant discovery to create enormous potential upside for shareholders. It's one of the most aggressive exploration companies pursuing high-grade, scalable gold and copper deposits, and has a premier 7-project portfolio, including its 2 flagships, Committee Bay in the Arctic and Sombrero in Peru. With Orin's unparalleled technical team and highly experienced management with a history of success in advancing and monetizing exploration assets, Orin has been called one of the best in the junior exploration sector. Orin trades on the TSX and NYSE under the ticker AUG. To learn more, go to aurinresources.com. That's AURYN resources.com. Are there questions that you bring to these one-on-one interactions at the booth that maybe you wouldn't bring if you were talking to the management over the phone? What I'm getting at is, are there kind of some non-traditional or non-standard questions that you might ask, generally when you're doing your due diligence for a company, that you would ask in the context of a 20-minute conversation standing there at their booth?
I think, going back to my own experience, I would say this. On a phone call, it's very formal, at least for me. Typically, I don't get much into anything personal, whereas at a booth or in that type of social setting, I might go into the personal side of stuff, or bring something up about myself and see if how the person reacts to that. And I would only really do that in person. The other thing is reading body language is if you can do it, can really help. And I think that's another thing that you get in person versus over the phone. You can see how the person reacts if you do ask a more controversial question or something that points to a weak point of the company, and see how defensive or non-defensive the person gets. I think those are the bigger takeaways. In terms of, I don't think, besides the personal stuff, I don't think I changed the questions that I ask.
You have a very thought out and calculated approach to due diligence, not just at these conferences, but you were recently on a site tour in Brazil. Can you share with us about that?
Sure. Yeah. The opportunity, there's a company I invested in earlier this year, and they're doing in the midst of a feasibility study. And I got the opportunity to go down to Brazil and see their Mara Rosa project, which is in the northern part of the Goiás state. I think that's how you say it. This is a really mining-friendly region of Brazil. There's, within 100 kilometers, I think there's like 6 different mines, all different metal types. And it's also a part of Brazil I'd never been to. So I was interested to see what that dynamic was. And it's really interesting. They're in the midst of completing some metallurgical work, which will be applied to their feasibility study. I got to see the site of where the open pit mine is going to be. And in particular, what I thought was interesting from a number of perspectives was the talk on tailings. Most people have heard of the tragic events, earlier this year in Brazil. The tailings dam collapsed. I think it killed around 300 people. And so basically what the Brazilian government is talking about doing is banning tailings dams for new construction. And while I understand, the tragic events, I think for, an all-out ban on tailings dams can have more ramifications than the government realizes. And I think it's sort of a knee-jerk reaction. But there are some ways you can go about dealing with no tailings dam. And what Amarillo is doing proactively is pursuing one of these things, and it's a horizontal filtration system that essentially removes the moisture content from the tailings and creates these mats. So these mats have to be stored the very similar way in a lined area, and the difference being that the low moisture content, once they seal this thing up, it's not going to go anywhere. So that was another interesting thing, and it was interesting to see where that was going to be placed, as the PFS tailings dam had it all laid out, and they're going to reuse that site and convert it into this mat storage area. The other interesting thing about this company is they're currently trading at roughly 10% of their after-tax NPV. And to me, I think there's a stigma that goes along with Brazil that it's very risky, which I think there are some definite risks. Jair Bolsonaro just became president. For those that don't know, they call him the Trump of the South, or Trump of Brazil, and he's got some very right-leaning policies. And for me, when I view this, I think it'll be very good for the Brazilian economy. And he's already taken steps. And one of the big things that he's done is he's pushed this pension reform bill through Parliament. And, I think this is going to be a great step in the right direction. It definitely doesn't solve anything, but I think it speaks to a sort of a change in Brazil. And then the caveat to that being, although I see a change within his 4-year term, long term, I think Brazil will go right back to where they were, because that culture, they take hundreds of years to change. But given all this, I think the price to risk ratio that Amarillo presents, it's well worth any risk that is associated with the jurisdiction.
The Mara Rosa project has an NPV at 5% of US 244.3 million at US $1,300 per ounce gold. Of course, gold is much higher than that now, so then the NPV is going to be higher. You mentioned the 10% of its PFS. The market cap of the company is trading at less than 10% of the NPV laid out in this pre-feasibility study. Have you done a study before you invested in this company? You obviously went there. You told me before the recording you participated in one of the financings for this company. Did you do a comparison of other projects that are at the pre-feasibility stage in Brazil and in South America to see, generally speaking, what is the market cap relative to the NPV of its core project?
Honestly, I didn't. For this project, a friend had told me to take a look, and I took a look, and I actually was quite interested. I did a discounted cash flow model, and it's extremely robust. Like, you can drop the gold price down quite a bit. Like, I think I was using 1,200 originally, like earlier this year, and you can up that discount factor to 10 or 15%, and you're still getting good economics. And that's what I really liked about it, on its own. And the fact that it was trading at such a small multiple, I just, at the time, it didn't really matter to me what the other ones were trading at. I think more so as we move along, what is this actually worth? I think that becomes more of a question. But when you're trading for less than 10% of the after-tax NPV and you're cashed up at the moment and doing the feasibility study, I think that there's a good case for undervaluing at the current moment.
At the pre-feasibility feasibility stage, there's arguably less catalyst that'll really move the share price strongly. Perhaps the strongest catalyst would be external to the company, that being the price of gold. How do you view the upcoming catalyst for Amarillo Gold?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that I've been asking myself. The company currently sits in that kind of orphan stage, I guess I've heard people call it, just before production or just before that kind of construction question. In terms of catalyst, the biggest thing I see is it's the biggest question mark for the Mara Rosa project is its metallurgy. It's complex, but in saying that, I got to see the amount of tests and data that the company has produced on how to extract the gold. And I'm quite confident that this next metallurgical work that's going to be coming out, I think before the end of the year, I think, to me at least, this is a huge step into proving that this project can work. I think the economics are quite clear that if that process works, that this is going to be a profitable gold mine. So to me, that metallurgical work is probably the biggest catalyst. And the other catalyst that I see at the moment, I don't invest because of this, but I think a higher gold price just makes this project more and more attractive. And once that metallurgical stuff is dealt with, I think the market will come to recognize it.
What percentage of your portfolio right now is in this developer stage category, Brian?
It would probably be around 5%, maybe a little bit higher.
So you're mostly in early stage exploration or producers? What's the breakdown like?
I don't even keep track of it. To me, it's just where I see I can make money.
Mm-hmm.
I've just done better that way instead of having like a concrete way of splitting up my money. It's wherever I see value and the chance for profitability linked in with that kind of risk adjustment, and I think compared to most, I probably am more willing to take risk on.
And for those that are not as familiar with Brian is a full-time mining investor. So when he invests his money, this is how he provides for his family. He was a former engineer and was successful with selling his house and then taking that money and I believe at least tripling it back in 2016. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, that's correct. Exactly.
And your website is Junior Stock Review. Make sure you're on Brian's email list. I'm going to put a link to this site visit write-up of Amarillo Gold that Brian was at a couple weeks ago in Brazil. So you can have a link to that article, and that'll take you to Brian's website, juniorstockreview.com. When you're there, make sure you get on his email list. He has a lot of quality, free content that he writes up his site visits, lets you know some companies he's investing in, as well as does quality interviews. I'm looking, there's a recent one here with Rick Rule and financiers, Mark O'Day. So make sure you're on Brian's list. Brian, as always, I appreciate our conversation. Thank you for your insights.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Thank you for listening to this Mining Stock Education podcast. Please subscribe and share with like-minded investors. Visit us on the web at miningstockeducation.com for more resources on precious metals and natural resource investing. At our website, you can also sign up for our free newsletter for interview transcripts, stock picks, and more.